And that'll be fine. Wave at me. Dignified silence. Okay. Good evening, everybody. For all of those watching and listening, we're well over 20 and rising, and we've had hundreds of people, thank you, putting in their comments, and I suspect many of you on this call have done so. Let me introduce myself properly and my colleagues, one of whom is in his way in, perhaps on the other side of this call. That's Councillor Mike Lilly, and I'm really thrilled to have Hannah Loftus, the Director of HAT Projects, whose work we're going to walk through here. As I say, my name is David King, Cabinet Member for Business and Resources. What we're going to do tonight is address some of the issues and concerns that have come through a largely very positive public reaction to this scheme, spend real time on making sure that we've worked through those, responding to Q&A and that you can insert into this process, and then we'll hand back one more time to Hannah through the rest of the presentation, and then have again a pause at the end. This is two ways, but it's intended, given the sheer numbers of people arriving onto the call, to give an opportunity for everybody to get an insight rather than for us to get stuck on any one conversation. But we'll do our best to do justice to both this great project and to you for providing your time. Thank you very much, and we'll go to the first proper slide. But the thank yous, genuine, thank you. That's us. And St Nicholas Square. For you to be on the call, you know where it is and you know what it's about. And the important thing for the council is the opportunity to have a conversation about what for us is two exciting gateway projects at Balkan Gate outside the Mercury Theatre. We'll have another event like this for that, and this event, which is around St Nicholas Square. Tonight's presentation focuses on that new scheme. Many people locally will know Colchester Architects HAT, and we'll go to Hannah, their director, in the moment. As I hope will have come through for those who looked at the survey, this is an unloved space at the moment, which we hope we can make much loved. We know how it could suit and fit the contours of the architecture and the purposes of the town as a place where we can meet, dine outside, gather up on our way to other places, whether it's events or markets, transform this part of Colchester. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks very much, Councillor King. So I'm Hannah Loftus. I'm one of the directors at HAT Projects. We're based in the town centre, so we know the site very well. This is part of the consultation that we're doing in developing the plans, and we have had a survey open for a couple of weeks now. So it had a really great response rate. So thank you so much to everybody who's participated so far. Generally extremely supportive, and some really helpful and insightful comments as well coming in to us so far. So yes, so we're just going to talk you through the scheme in a little bit of detail here. Maybe if we could have the next slide. Hopefully, yes, there we are. Thank you. Some of the questions that have come up include some clarity around the treatment of the gravestones in the space, some questions around the trees and pedestrianising of Longwire Street, and some other questions here. We're going to go over quite a few of these as part of the presentation on the scheme, but we can just probably pick up on a few of these now before we kind of go through the scheme in a bit more detail. So some people have raised some questions around the gravestones on the site. This plan here, which I hope you can see, shows. Oh no, that's perfect, Councillor King.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely perfect
Right.
illustration
Yeah.
on the gravestones. Yeah, do just go on one more. Actually. Yeah, perfect. The one back one. Sorry, this is a bit Chris Whitty in the that one. Wonderful. Perfect. So that, as many of you know, there was quite amazing church on this site actually until the 1950s, where, for reasons best known to those at the time, they decided to knock it down. And this slide shows the layout of the former churchyard in the space at that time. And then the dark green patches are where there are currently 2 remaining sort of grassed plots. And what happened was they basically gathered up all the gravestones in the 1950s when they redeveloped the area, and they kind of plonked them in those 2 grassed plots. So they're not actually in their original positions anymore. Which is why we feel, and we've spoken with the diocese and had extensive engagement on this matter, we feel that it's appropriate to try and treat them a little bit more carefully going forward. At the moment, they're really quite hard to see. They're not very well looked after either. So just for clarity on that, we're not proposing to disturb any graves. We've done some trial pits with the Colchester Archaeological Trust, which have established the depth of where there are remains below ground, so we know how far we can go with before we get into disturbing anything. And just in case there's something unexpected that comes up whilst we are doing the work, there will be an archaeologist supervising on site. So I'll show you a little bit later on in the slide presentation a bit about the detail of how we're going to deal with the gravestones in terms of design, but I suppose just wanted to reassure anyone who has a question around that we are very much being guided by the historical evidence about the site and guided by the archaeological advice as well, and are going to be proceeding very, very carefully. And we hope we're going to treat the gravestones in a way that gives them a much kind of more respectful treatment, makes them more visible, and makes them a more permanent kind of memorial really to what was there than how they are at the moment. Just to maybe keep going through the slides here, thank you very much. The aim of the scheme, as you will know, is to really create a really high quality public space here, with more trees, more space for outdoor eating and drinking, and also space for markets and events. For instance, small kind of pop-ups, food stalls, small performances and so forth. So really making it a space that is multifunctional, that works day and evening, and is a much more welcoming, much more pedestrian focused space than it is at the moment. It is one of the things that we're going to be doing is therefore rerouting a little bit of the traffic around the area, and that's something that some people have also commented on as part of the survey. So the next slide, if you might be able to bring that up, shows how we're going to be doing that. So on the left, that's the current traffic and delivery arrangements. And as you'll see, it's actually a 2-way street in to the square at the moment. You can both enter from the high street and exit back out to the high street, which means there's quite a lot of space given over for vehicle movement. What the proposal is to make St Nicholas Street 1-way only. So that means that you'll still be able to drive through the square if you need to drop something off or deliver something, but it means that we can essentially reduce the amount of road width that we need there and give over much more space for pedestrians. Alongside that, we've done a door-to-door survey of all the shops in the area and talked to them all about their loading arrangements and delivery arrangements. And what we found is that actually the vast majority of the local businesses actually don't use St Nicholas Square for loading, although it has a lot of loading bays, because they are served by other loading arrangements in the area, whether that's the high street itself, the underground Lion Walk delivery area, which serves the Co-op building and most of the other shops on that side of Longwire Street. And then there were also a couple of loading yards accessed from Queen Street, which served the majority of the shops on Longwire Street on the eastern side. Sainsbury's, of course, also has its own loading yard. So based on that, we're pretty confident that we can reduce the amount of loading bays in St Nicholas Square considerably. So we are still keeping, as you can see, some loading for local businesses. That will be time restricted, as is the case with many of the loading bays in the area. But that will allow us, again, to create, as you can see, a lot more space for people to use, people to enjoy, sit out, just casually enjoy the space. Please do obviously put any questions in the chat at the moment or in the Q&A, and we'll pick them up as we go along. Maybe if we could have the next slide. This is the proposed layout for the square. So as you can see, we end up with much wider pavements and much more open space, which will be much more level as well in terms of the way that the levels are treated, less trip hazards and more pedestrian focused. The main focus is the kind of central area, which we want to try and leave open and relatively flexible for markets and events and so forth. There are also going to be new cycle racks, bins, and then the benches around the trees, which I'll talk about in a minute in a bit more detail. We're also talking with Surya, who run the St Nicholas Hotel, about a potential kind of canopy structure that they may like to create, shading some outdoor seating for them. Obviously their building is south facing, so having some shade there will be really welcome for their outdoor seating areas going forward. And then you can see there's also quite a bit more tree planting being proposed, which I think is a really positive move in terms of greening the town centre. And I'm going to just talk about that because I know that's a question that a lot of people have had some questions about in the survey. So maybe if you could go to the next slide, that just shows a little bit more detail. Oh yeah, sorry, that's just before we go on, a little bit more of a zoomed in version of looking at the design. Really about the accessibility. We've consulted with visually impaired users and wheelchair users as well about how to make the space as user-friendly as possible for users of all sorts, and really prioritising the vulnerable users, so people who have different needs, and also children and young people, to make sure that it's a really easy to use space. There is a little bit of a level change, so we are negotiating that with some steps around by the corner of St Nicholas House, and then there'll also be a level route, so a step-free route around the square as well. Next one. So the existing trees on the site, that's something that few people have questioned. So there are 3 existing trees in the square. One is the horse chestnut tree, which you can see towards the back of this image, and then there are 2 yew trees as well. We've had arboricultural advice on the condition of the trees and how long their life expectancy might be expected to last, and so forth. And we really are, again, sort of guided by their advice, as well as trying to make the square as functional as possible. The advice that we've had is that the yews aren't really in very good condition, unfortunately. One of them you can just about see in this picture, and it's a little bit dark, but it's actually kind of growing out of the wall, and it's got a really big split in it, which isn't great for the condition of the tree, and as a result its life expectancy is not expected to be that much longer, unfortunately. And they also do have very low canopies. All of the trees, in fact, at the moment have quite low canopies, which means that it's quite difficult to do anything underneath them. They have very large canopies and very low canopies, so sitting outside or even walking underneath them is actually really difficult. The chestnut tree, it's considered, is in fairly good health, and giving that a little bit of a kind of canopy shaping, so pruning it back a little bit to raise the canopy so you can sit and walk underneath it easily, is felt to be both feasible and desirable, and that will keep that kind of healthy and in good condition. But the advice that we've received is that the yew trees really, unfortunately, they don't suit that kind of treatment at all, and as they're already not in the best of health, that probably isn't going to work very well for them. In addition, they do obviously drop poisonous berries, which is another concern that has been raised. So, you know, if we do want this to be a space that's used more by people, we obviously want to make sure that children and so forth aren't picking up berries, putting them in their mouths accidentally and so forth. That wouldn't be great for anybody. So what's proposed is that we do take out the 2 yew trees, but we are actually going to put in a lot more replacement trees than we're taking out, and they're shown on the next slide coming up. So the existing chestnut tree, you can see retained. I haven't put a dot on that one. Then the red dot shows a new plane tree that is proposed in the location of one of the existing yew trees. Then there are 3 new honey locust trees. That's the type of tree that's shown in the photo on the top right, along outside 3 Wise Monkeys and Jacks, and that will create a really nice kind of shaded area for the seating, but they're trees that don't grow too big, so they kind of work with the fact that we've got the buildings there, and they're also a really climate resilient tree, which is really important. And then we're looking at 4 additional trees, which we're hoping to be plane trees, which will be kept in a pollarded kind of form, moving down the space. Those are the kind of yellow dots. And then the picture on the bottom right shows the kind of approach we're looking at for benches around those, so that create a really lovely place to just kind of sit in the shade of the trees going forward. So we know that people do have concerns over the yew trees. We're trying to do the best that we can given the advice that we've had, and also trying to keep the middle part of the square relatively open, because I think that ultimately we have to make a choice between whether we keep the existing yew trees and therefore we can't really use the centre of the space for anything other, it couldn't be used for events or markets and the like, and we also face the prospect that they may not live that much longer anyway, or we take what we feel is a proactive step and add a lot more trees into the space, which would be really good, and from a climate perspective, create shade, obviously make it look beautiful as well. But I suppose if anyone has any questions around that, I'd be happy to go into a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit more detail on those gravestones. As you can see, a lot of them are basically just lined up against the wall. They're not really well, they haven't been maintained at all. They're quite difficult to see, and the existing sort of walls around them do create quite a lot of littering issues, as you can see in the picture as well. As we mentioned, we've looked into the historical records, and we've spoken to the diocese and to the local parish as well about this, and they're really supportive of the idea that we treat them respectfully, but we do kind of relocate them into the landscape scheme of the design, and that will be a much more permanent way for them to be preserved, kept in good condition, and so forth. So the next slide, I think, shows an example of how this has been done elsewhere. So the picture on the right is actually in the Barbican in London, where St Giles Cripplegate was unfortunately bombed in the Second World War, and as a result the graveyard became part of the redevelopment of the Barbican, and you can see how they've incorporated the gravestones into the kind of this sort of bench plinth seating around the trees there. So that means that people aren't walking on them, which obviously isn't something that has brilliant connotations. It means you can see them, they're easy to keep clean, and they are sort of permanently embedded into the architecture of the space. So we're hoping to take a similar approach to that, and we're also looking to commemorate the kind of history of the site through a plaque similar to the ones that have been put up as part of the Fixing the Link project, which we think really work fantastically well, the cast metal plaques, and I've just shown a picture here of the one for the Dutch Quarter. So we're going to have a very similar plaque that will hold some of the history of the area, history of the church. So if people are curious about why there are gravestones there, that will give people some information, and that's also a really durable way of commemorating that. It's not a interpretation board or something that ends up looking a little bit perhaps tatty over a number of years. That's something that's really well made, really permanently made, and can be embedded in the space. Just going on, I'm seeing a few questions come up. Actually, I just saw one about new yew trees, and I think that's a really interesting idea, and we'll definitely take that question away, which is, what could new yew trees be planted somewhere else in Colchester to replace them? I think we'll definitely take that away as a suggestion. It sounds like a good one. We'll need to discuss that with our colleagues at the council who are our client, and see where they may think would be suitable for that. If you could maybe just go on to the next slide. So this is the sort of layout of the current design, which I thought would probably be a good place to kind of end, and while we answer some of the other questions. You can see the steps up to the square, the kind of bench seating around the trees, the loading bay with the bollards, which will be a bit like at the entrance to Culver Street West and so forth. They'll be taken down at the beginning of the day for loading and then put back up later in the day, and so forth. I see a question about cycle stands. Can we have plain Sheffield cycle stands? Absolutely. We are definitely having plain Sheffield cycle stands. Nothing else is good enough. They are the bee's knees when it comes to cycle stands, and we have heard some really interesting comments actually about spacing for non-standard bikes, particularly with the e-cargo bikes and other sorts of bikes that are becoming more common now, and that's something we definitely are wanting to take into account here. So yeah, we will provide some spacing for non-standard bikes, and we're looking to hopefully get some advice on how best to do that from local colleagues who obviously are, we have great cycling groups in the town, so we're really grateful for their comments and input. I'm just scrolling down to see if there are more questions here. Oh, there's one about a talking bench. So yes, so I think this comes to this question of interpretation. So at the moment, we don't have a sort of talking bench idea, though that's a really interesting one. And again, I think that's something that we can take away to think about. So I have come across them in some other places. I think, they can work really well. Obviously, they need to be maintained over time because they are dependent on, the power supply and so forth. But yeah, that's a really good question. And thanks for the suggestion there. I'm not seeing any other questions, just returning to what some other people have raised on the survey so far. There was a question around pedestrianising Long Wire Street, and some people saying we would like to have that pedestrianised. It's not something that we're looking at as part of this scheme. There is a wider question around town centre vehicle movement. There are obviously businesses down there, and that would need some quite extensive consultation with them about what they'd like to see, because it's not just Long Wire Street, it's actually about the route round from Queen Street as well. So while some of those businesses might be fine with it being pedestrianised, we might need to make sure that all the way round the route, and I'm sure that's something that Colchester Borough Council colleagues and Essex County colleagues will definitely take on board. A few of the other questions were around public WCs and whether we could have some more. That's not something that is in this scheme. It's not a huge space here, so putting in an additional building or small building for WCs, I think, was felt to be probably not the best use of the space here, given that it is quite limited. I don't know if any other Borough Council colleagues want to comment on that, because I know there's always further work being done on WC provision around the town. There are also services for events. We are having power and water for events, so there'll be power pop-ups and water pop-ups in the space, so that market stall traders and any events can have those. And then there was a question around play and children's facilities that has been raised in the survey as well. Some people wondering whether we could incorporate some more play facilities. I think at an earlier stage that was discussed, I think it was felt that the space is relatively small for something like that, and Castle Park isn't that far away. And actually, when looking at where play facilities might be best located in the town centre, there may be other spaces coming on stream where that may be more appropriately located, just given the scale of the space. I think the vision here is, because there are the food and drink businesses around the area, giving it more of a kind of food and drink focus will help it to become something that has a real identity of its own. But I know that there are other spaces and other questions about play and children's facilities. There are other conversations happening around those. I feel like I've sort of monopolised the mic a lot, so I don't know if Councillor King or any of our other colleagues on the call want to talk to any of the questions so far. Oh, I've seen another question coming in around, can trees be illuminated for nighttime? Yes, is the answer. I should have talked about that actually. There is going to be more lighting in the space generally. So we've done an audit of the street lighting. One of them doesn't work at the moment. We're looking to get that back working and make sure that there is a sort of general level of lighting. But then yes, so that the benches around the trees will have lighting integrated into them, which will be really great. And also the steps will also have lighting integrated into the risers of the steps as well, which is both really helpful from an accessibility perspective, in that it makes it easier to obviously make sure you can see where the steps are and so forth, and also will hopefully cast a really kind of nice light and just have that bit of atmospheric lighting as well. I see another question about timescales, and I don't know whether maybe Alison might be best to talk to the timescales.
Yes, please.
Yes. Hello, everyone. In terms of timescales, it is it's fairly difficult because whilst St Nicholas Square isn't very big, it's a very complex project because it has lots of different land ownerships and you know, and the sort of highways and that side of things. So there's quite a lot to cover off in terms of background work, sort of behind the scenes. But you might have seen that there is a planning application in just to cover off the area around the graveyards at the moment, and we're working very closely with Essex Highways, who are working on the TROs and you know, sort of how the road layout would work as well. And all these things do take time. There's quite a lot of legal agreements to be covered off. So that said, that in terms of actually getting the job done, it shouldn't take that long, and we would envisage to be finished hopefully sort of late summer this year. So once we get on site, it won't take very long at all.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. We know you'll try and do better than that with Hannah. Hannah, there was a question about signage I saw, and I don't think we picked that one up. Are we expecting to provide a linkage signage to this square amongst to other parts of the town?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And there is some wider work actually being done about signage in the town centre that we're aware of. So there's a kind of slightly more holistic look being taken. I'm not sure what Alison, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say about that project at the moment, but I know it's sort of live discussion at the moment about improving town centre signage more generally.
Yes, I mean, I don't actually work on that project either, but I do know that it is something that's under discussion, and it's something that we're all very much aware of and want to improve.
Right. Well, we'll take that away as a maybe then, and certainly.
I think watch this space would be a good one on that.
Thank you. And there's a reference to the post box in the visual.
Yep.
And
that will be kept. The post box will continue to be there for your convenience.
And the look of it as well. Any more questions or queries can we see coming through?
I see a question about the e-scooter hub. I mean, I guess that is whether it would be a good space for an e-scooter hub. I think we'll obviously just watch the space really on the trial there. You know, we're definitely keen to encourage active travel and you know, non-vehicle travel. So I think we'll just have to see how that trial comes out.
Thank you, Hannah. I think on all of this, perhaps just a general remark I make, because this is very much the public's opportunity, as is the survey, and it's been fantastic seeing so many and positive but also shaping questions, isn't it? You know, we will get some things from this, and we will take as many of them as we can. I know that's your approach into aspects of the detail. If it's confirmation, that's great. If it's tuning, that's in a way even better if we can do that. But this is about balanced use of the square, isn't it? It can't be too crowded. One of the things we want to make sure we have is a sense of space and quality, and if there is no space for people to see what we've got, in fact you might want to talk about that in design terms, how in your head this works, and so how will the individual feel when they're walking through the square. They've got restaurants left and right, they're looking up, they're looking down. Would you like to sort of give a sense of how you think that might feel for them?
Yeah, well, you know, what we hope is that it will feel like a real kind of little piazza in a way, a square that has a very relaxed feel, and more than anything, I think that feels that it is focused on people and not vehicles. So, you know, it really is a space where there will be seating associated with the cafes and the bars and the restaurants and so forth around the space, but also seating if you just want to have your sandwich at lunchtime, sit outside, you know, just rest your feet for a minute whilst you've been wandering around the shops or gone to the castle or whatever it might be. So it really is, the intention is it's a space for everyone. It has a kind of, there's a commercial element to it, but there's also just a real public element to it, whereby you can, you know, just use it as a really nice space to relax and enjoy. The materials are designed to be really durable and really high quality. So we're looking at York stone paving, granite sets for some of the areas where we want a kind of colour contrast, so the carriageway areas and things like that. So really good quality materials, very much kind of in line with the historic feel of the town centre, and hopefully setting a kind of good example for how, you know, future town spaces, you know, hopefully this is the you know, these spaces that we're doing now are the first of, we hope, more renovations to come for the town centre. So we want it to really set the bar high for that. I think, I hope you don't mind me saying that to Councillor King
No, absolutely, Hannah. We want quality, and
yes.
quality. We want to raise the whole sense, the experience of being that part of the town. And we know from some of the reactions on the survey, ought to acknowledge it, because there are divided views about other developments not so far away. We'll have to sort of see where we get to on all of that. But this stands in its own right. The concept, the square, the reaction to it, that it has to be seen in the context of its own geography. And I think we feel passionate about it as well, Hannah, that this is going to give something very different, a real step up, and a real example of what we can do in Colchester. And life is competitive. We want people to come here. We don't want them to we love Ipswich and Chelmsford, but we want them to decide to come to Colchester and have a walk, a wander, a sit, an eat and a drink, Hannah, and we deliver this well and enjoy it in the way that you've described it as a great place for people to walk through. I'm conscious of we're well inside our time, so I do want to give Hannah extra opportunities for people if they've got an extra question. While we're waiting to see if there are any others.
There are some other questions I'm just seeing come up here.
Thank you.
So there's a question about the bus timetable display and also about Christmas trees. I think it's a great idea that maybe there could be a Christmas tree in the space at season. I think that's exactly the sorts of events, I think it'd be a wonderful location for kind of Christmas market, things like that in the future. And the bus timetable display, that's currently obviously on site, is currently worked in with the plan, so there's no change there currently. And then there's a question about public art in the space. At the moment, we don't have plans for a specific kind of, if you like, artwork in the space. Obviously, we hope that the space itself will be an artwork, and particularly the treatment of the gravestones and so forth, really having that kind of very special feel that feels bespoke and unique to the space. And I think I saw another question. Oh, and then there was a question around CCTV in the square. So there is some existing CCTV around the area, and it's something that we're liaising with town centre colleagues about in terms of town centre management to make sure that we meet their needs. Mainly, one of the things that's come back is really about lighting, to be honest, that it's, at the moment the lighting is quite poor there, so upgrading the lighting and making sure that it's really well lit is a priority.
Thank you, Hannah. And I think that's covered most of them. We ought to be publishing them, Daniel, if you're listening, so people can see what's coming through. Aspects of design and new space emphasise a creative feel. Colchester-braided memories for tourists and visitors. Well, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? How we add to what's in place. I mean, I think from my perspective, this is about creating the kind of space that is a setting for what's great around it. But what would you want to say, Hannah?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, because actually the origins of this work are in a study that we did a couple of years ago for the Borough Council that looked at all of the town centre's public spaces and what were the characteristics of them and which ones worked well and which ones worked less well. And one of the things that we really emphasised in that study and the kind of recommendations in our report were exactly about how to make something that feels special to Colchester. So, if you're in that space, you couldn't be anywhere else. You couldn't be in Chelmsford or Ipswich or even, Bath or Bristol or wherever. It would really feel of Colchester. And part of that is about materials. So using materials that really are sympathetic and perhaps hark back to some of the more historic materials used in the town rather than kind of generic concrete pavers and things like that really could be anywhere. And I think the other thing that we think is really special about Colchester is actually this character of the smaller, narrower lanes and streets and these small public spaces. And at the moment, so many of those public spaces aren't really singing as well as they could be singing. Then they're not celebrated as much as they could be, but it's quite unique. Other towns in East Anglia and even in the country actually don't really have this pattern of these little pocket squares dotted around the town centre. So we think that's really special, and just clarifying those, bringing those back to life, making them read as squares rather than as lay-bys or loading bays feels really important to giving back to Colchester, that kind of sense of being this medieval town centre on this Roman grid that's still there, but sometimes it's just so cluttered up with other stuff that you kind of can't even see it for what it is. And so in our minds, a lot of the best public realm design is about decluttering and making things simple, not putting loads more stuff in that will kind of clutter it back up again.
Thank you, Hannah. I mean, that picks up with the earlier exchanges, I think, which were lots of ideas, and we want to take as many as possible, and I think that we are. And you will be listening. We want you to the sort of the extra views we've heard tonight. But at the end of the day, it has to be a balance, doesn't it? Because as I've said myself, and others will feel the same, it's about that sense of space to walk through also. So it's a balance between the dimensions you've got and the human sense of scale that allows you to then enjoy what you've got. That's a really great question from Lee, and I thank him for that. That's really helpful. We're going to do our very best between us to make sure it is quality, as another comment, and thank you for that as well. This is about quality ambition. It is a real sense of opportunity because it takes years to get to the point where an idea has the funding and the will, and now we're at that point, and that's for all of us involved in this and all the many people who have commented. That's plain that struck a chord. Any other questions for anybody else? And we don't mind going back, I know, Hannah, over some of the ground.
I think there's a question about management of the space and how we can encourage people to put on events, and maybe Alison, you could speak to that.
Yes, no, absolutely. It is, we really do want to see the space used for events. It's a really great opportunity to have a really sort of vibrant patch of the town centre. We are having sort of lots of discussions and conversations around how this could work, because we really do want it to be an opportunity for people to be able to use it. So it is something that's very much on our mind. And in terms of the general management, beyond events, sort of the general management of the space and, how it's looked after and all that sort of thing, so that we have a really high quality space that's amazing for everybody to use for a long time.
And we've been speaking to the bid and obviously the town centre management team, the markets team and so forth. So there's been a lot of engagement behind the scenes with a lot of the kind of key people, key players, if you like, in that. And obviously we've also spoken to Three Wise Monkeys and the co-op people and everybody else around the site. So there's a lot of enthusiasm, I think. And I think, I'm sure when it's done, colleagues in the bid and in the council will welcome ideas for how to use it and to put on and suggestions for events and so forth.
And there's public space, of course. We want the public to have a view. Things that will happen will be public in the sense it's in that shared space, isn't it? And it's really important that we make it as available as we can, as vibrant as we can. So events have a place in here, which is perhaps part of the point of the question. I saw in the chat, and I think we're sort of going a little wider, a question about the High Street, and I think I'm very happy that we just touch on that. That's not tonight's conversation, but this is all about linkage, and for those who know the area better than I, when you stand where we're talking about, and you stand in that at the moment, cut through, one of the great advantages will be the sense of change that will come from it being one direction, not two, and for it being shaped for people rather than shaped for traffic, which is, I think, certainly how it feels a lot of the time. It's one of the fantastic, great bonuses we'll get is closer to Piazza requires a bit of peace, so you're not being run over, or you've got somebody unloading when they don't have to. Shaping it for that really matters. So the connection to the High Street and the question I've just seen around High Street tree planting, fully understand. I think I would just sort of say, I speak for myself, and one of my personal interests for colleagues, and it's widely shared, is about tree planting sensibly and biodiversity. Be alive to and sympathetic to what there is and preserve or improve the best we've got. The High Street is another opportunity. So one of the things we are doing is urban tree planting. You, Hannah, your proposal for us and for Colchester is about urban tree planting. We want to do that wherever we can. We're looking at partners called Trees for Streets, amongst others, who a government initiative, bless it, which I support, to try to put trees in urban gaps, perhaps where they died 20, 30 years ago. The High Street's more tricky, but the same principle applies. And we are putting into the high street what are called parklets, which is greenery and a place to sit, is how I would put it. So it will look, by the end of this year, April actually should be the time, long delayed, it will start to look a little different, and we will continue to work with County Council to see what else we can do. So I thank whoever it was who put the question in. We really want to look more widely. So this is the start. And looking at the question just here, wonky paving and everything else. Yes, we spent a lot of money the last year. It disappears quick in trying to improve pavings. And it's back to your point, Hannah, about quality. We need to have things done well. Good material, done to a high standard, not messed up by the next utility company. This unfortunately will happen, but we're going to do our very best to address the rest of the public space. And for those who are aware of the town deal, we wait the answer on that. Maybe in the next day or so we'll hear. Is another opportunity for us to bring in further investment, and it will have the same kind of feel: quality materials, connectivity, space for humans, as well as necessary traffic, and encouragement for an active life and a better feel, a cafe culture, the kind, Hannah, that your work is going to encourage. So I hope that answers the wider questions I'm seeing popped into the chat.
There's a question around the soup kitchen, which I think is a really good question. I think Alison may be able to speak to that, because that's actually something that people have raised at the moment.
Yeah, no, thanks, Hannah. No, that's something that has come up quite a bit, and the soup kitchen is obviously a really, really important facility in the town centre. It is a tricky one, so we are talking to them, and we've sort of like got an ongoing dialogue about what will happen, because it's not kind of an easy thing to deal with, because obviously they need somewhere safe to operate from, which, you know, might actually be where they are at the moment. But at the same time, you know, we need to be sensitive for everybody, really. And so we're trying to look for what the possibilities could be for them, and how things will work, particularly as there will be sort of building work going on anyway in the coming months.
Thank you very much.
I'm hoping I think we've picked up most of the questions here, but obviously if there are any other questions, I think that Councillor King will share the closing slide, which gives the email address and website address and so forth for further questions. And of course the survey is still open for another couple of weeks, I think, so please do fill that in, leave any comments there. We've had hundreds already. It's really, I have to say, it's just really, really great for us to get such a fantastic level of feedback. It is so useful and so meaningful to us, and makes it all kind of worthwhile. So thank you to everyone who has participated in that. It really is great to have such a lot of feedback. I can't see any further questions.
I think that's it. I think that is it. And subject to any other questions anybody can see.
Don't think so. No, I can't see anyone.
Thank you. Well then, Hannah, you've said it extraordinarily well, and all I can do is just add my voice to yours and say thank you to everybody who spent best part of another hour of their busy lives for us, for their town, for this scheme. Hannah, huge thanks to you for fielding so many questions and queries offline, as well as a number of us have tried to do. And Alison, with your colleagues, helping getting the project to this stage. So, and to Daniel and the team behind the scene, thank you. Apart from my hiccups with the slides, it was an unexpected duty. I failed. I think it's gone well. And so my thanks to everybody. We'll continue to publicise, we'll continue to welcome contributions and comments, and we really look forward to taking this to the next stage, and hopefully this spring, summer, to being in place. And thank you, Dorian. That's great to see this works for you. That really matters to us, and that should be published immediately.
Thank you all, and we look forward to definitely continuing some of these conversations, and those of you who have filled in your contact details on the survey will be getting back to you as well with feedback and so forth as requested.
Thank you very much indeed. Then Daniel, you can close us down. Thank you everybody, apart from the chat for us behind the scenes.